black luxury car pulled up to the restaurant with a soft purr. David Chen stepped out, straightening his expensive suit jacket as he handed the keys to the valet. At 34, he had everything money could buy. His tech company had made him a billionaire before he turned 30, and he never let anyone forget it. The Garden Terrace was the kind of place where reservations were booked months in advance. Tonight, David was meeting potential investors for his latest venture. He needed to impress them, and this restaurant would do the job perfectly. As he walked through the glass doors, the hostess greeted him with a bright smile. "Good evening, Mr. Chen. Your table is ready." David followed her through the dimly lit dining room. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and fresh flowers. The soft murmur of conversation filled the air, punctuated by the gentle clink of silverware against fine china. "Your server will be with you shortly," the hostess said, pulling out his chair at a prime table near the window. David settled in and checked his watch. His guests would arrive in 20 minutes. He glanced around the room, taking in the other diners. Successful people, he thought with satisfaction. His kind of crowd. A figure approached his table, and David looked up from his phone. His jaw nearly dropped. Standing there in a crisp white shirt and black apron was someone he hadn't seen in almost 20 years. "Good evening. Welcome to the Garden Terrace. My name is Rachel, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Rachel Martinez. David couldn't believe it. The girl who had been valedictorian of their high school class was standing in front of him, with a server's apron around her waist. Back in high school, Rachel had been the smart one. While David was busy throwing parties and barely scraping by with C's, she was collecting academic awards and tutoring other students. She had even helped him pass calculus during senior year, spending countless hours explaining equations he couldn't grasp. Everyone expected great things from Rachel. Full scholarship to a top university, medical school maybe, or law school. She was the type of person who seemed destined for success. And here she was, 20 years later, asking if he wanted still or sparkling water. "Rachel Martinez," David said slowly, a smirk spreading across his face. Well. Look who it is." Rachel's expression didn't change, but David caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "Hello, David. It's been a long time." "It certainly has." David leaned back in his chair, looking her up and down. "So this is what you're doing now? Taking dinner orders?" "I'm working here, yes," Rachel replied evenly. "Would you like to start with something to drink?" David chuckled. "You know, I have to say, this is pretty surprising. I mean, you were the smartest kid in our class. Valedictorian, right? All those scholarship offers. And now?" He gestured at her apron with obvious amusement. Rachel maintained her professional smile. "What can I get you to drink tonight?" "This is just incredible," David continued, shaking his head. "I remember you used to help me with homework. You were so serious about everything, always talking about your big plans. Medical school, wasn't it? Or was it law school? Sir, if you'd like to order a drink, I can help you with that. Otherwise, I should check on my other tables." David's grin widened. He was enjoying this more than he expected. "Oh, come on, Rachel. Don't be so formal. We're old friends, right? I'm just trying to catch up. What happened to all those big dreams you used to have?" A man at the table next to them glanced over with a frown. Rachel noticed and lowered her voice slightly. "David, I'm at work right now. If you'd like to place an order, I'm happy to help. If not, I really do need to attend to my other customers." Right. You've got important work to do." David picked up the wine list. "Tell you what, why don't you bring me a bottle of the 2015 Bordeaux? The Chateau Margaux. You probably don't know much about wine, but it's the one that costs $400. Rachel wrote down the order without flinching. "Excellent choice. I'll have the sommelier bring that right out." As she turned to leave, David called after her. "Hey, Rachel. Just out of curiosity, what happened? I mean, you were supposed to be the success story from our class. Did you ever make it to college?" Rachel paused but didn't turn around. "I'll get your wine, David." David watched her walk away, shaking his head in amazement. This was better than he could have imagined. Rachel Martinez, the girl who used to make him feel stupid in calculus class, was now serving him dinner. When his business associates arrived 10 minutes later, David was practically bubbling with excitement. "Gentlemen, welcome," he said, standing to shake hands with the three investors. "I have to tell you, this evening just got a lot more interesting." As they settled into their seats, David couldn't resist sharing his discovery. You're not going to believe this, but I just ran into an old classmate. She's our server tonight. That's nice, said Robert, the lead investor, glancing at his menu. Small world. Oh, but here's the thing, David continued. Back in high school, this girl thought she was so much better than everyone else. Straight A's, valedictorian, full scholarship offers. She used to tutor me in math, and she had this attitude like she was doing me this huge favor. James, another investor, looked up from his menu. And now she works here? Exactly. David's eyes lit up. 20 years later, and look how things turned out. I'm worth $3 billion, and she's asking if I want my salad dressing on the side. The third investor, Michael, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That seems a bit harsh, David. There's nothing wrong with working in a restaurant. Of course not, David said quickly. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with honest work. I'm just saying it's funny how life works out, you know? The people who think they're so smart in high school don't always end up where they expect. Rachel appeared at their table with David's wine. The sommelier followed behind her, presenting the bottle for David's approval. Ah, perfect timing, David said loudly. Gentlemen, meet Rachel Martinez. Rachel, these are some very important business partners of mine. Rachel nodded politely. Good evening. Welcome to the Garden Terrace. Rachel and I went to high school together, David announced. She was the brain of our class. Top of everything. And now here she is, making sure we have everything we need for dinner. The sommelier poured a small taste of wine for David. He swirled it in his glass and took a sip, making an exaggerated show of considering the flavor. Perfect, he declared. Rachel, you should try this sometime, though I guess it's probably a bit outside your price range. Rachel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. Would you like me to pour for the table? Please do, David said, settling back in his chair with obvious satisfaction. As Rachel carefully poured wine for each of the men, David continued his commentary. You know, it just goes to show you never really know how things will turn out. Some people peak in high school, I guess. Michael cleared his throat. David, perhaps we should look at the menu. Right, of course, David said, but his attention remained fixed on Rachel. So tell me, Rachel, do you ever think about the old days? Remember when you used to help me with calculus? Funny how the tables have turned, isn't it? Rachel finished pouring the wine and set the bottle on the table. Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes? Oh, we'll need a few minutes, David said with a wave of his hand. But don't go too far. We might need some recommendations. I'm sure you know which dishes are appropriate for our budget. As Rachel walked away, David turned to his business partners with a satisfied grin. This is going to be an interesting evening. The expensive wine had loosened David's tongue, and his behavior was getting worse by the minute. Every time Rachel approached their table, he found new ways to remind everyone about their shared past. Oh, Rachel, he called out as she served appetizers to a nearby table. Could you come here for a second? Rachel finished setting down the plates and walked over to David's table. What can I help you with? I was just telling my friends here about how you used to tutor me in high school. Remember those study sessions in the library? You were so patient with me, even though I was probably the worst math student you ever worked with. Robert, the lead investor, looked increasingly uncomfortable. David, maybe we should focus on business. This is business in a way, David laughed. I'm showing you guys how far I've come. From the kid who needed tutoring to this. He gestured at his expensive watch and suit. Rachel kept her voice level. Is there something you need for your table? Actually, yes. Could you bring us some more bread? And maybe some of that fancy butter you guys have. The imported stuff. Of course. As Rachel turned to leave, David called after her again. And Rachel, take your time. I know you're probably busy with all your other tables. The sarcasm in his voice was impossible to miss. A couple at a nearby table had started glancing over, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. When Rachel returned with fresh bread and butter, David was ready with another performance. You know what I was just thinking about? He said loud enough for surrounding tables to hear. Remember senior year when I almost didn't graduate? You spent hours helping me with that final calculus exam. I used to joke that you cared more about my grades than I did. Rachel set down the bread basket. Will there be anything else? I wonder what my old teachers would think if they could see us now, David continued. They probably thought you'd be the one running some big company and I'd be the one. He paused dramatically. Well, let's just say they had it backwards. James, one of the investors, put down his wine glass. David, I think that's enough. Oh, come on. I'm just having some fun with an old friend. Right, Rachel? We're just reminiscing about the good old days. Rachel's smile was growing more strained, but she maintained her composure. Are you ready to order your entrees? Not quite yet, David said, settling back in his chair. Actually, I'm curious about something. What happened to all those college acceptances you got? I remember you had your pick of schools. Full ride to pretty much anywhere you wanted to go. Sir, I really need to check on my other tables. Just one quick question, David pressed. Did you even go to college? Or did life just get in the way? Michael shifted in his seat. This is really inappropriate, David. What? I'm just catching up with an old classmate. There's nothing wrong with that. David turned back to Rachel. So, did you make it to college? Rachel was quiet for a long moment. The professional mask was still in place, but David could see the tension in her shoulders. Yes, I went to college, she said finally. Really? Where did you go? I'm sure it was somewhere impressive. David, I need to take care of my other customers now. Sure. But just tell me where you went. I'm genuinely curious. Rachel glanced around the dining room. Other servers were watching now, concern evident on their faces. A man in a suit, probably a manager, had appeared near the kitchen door and was keeping an eye on the situation. I went to the Culinary Institute, Rachel said quietly. David's eyebrows shot up. Culinary school, really? So you became a chef? I studied hospitality management as well. Hospitality management, David repeated slowly. And now you're working as a server. That must be disappointing. The words hung in the air like a slap. Several people at nearby tables had stopped eating to listen. There's nothing disappointing about honest work, Rachel said, her voice steady despite the obvious provocation. Of course not, David said quickly. I didn't mean it that way. I just meant that you probably had bigger plans, right? I mean, hospitality management sounds like something that would lead to running hotels or restaurants, not serving in them. Robert stood up abruptly. I need to use the restroom. He walked away from the table, clearly wanting to distance himself from David's behavior. David didn't seem to notice. He was enjoying himself too much. You know what the really funny part is? He continued. Back in high school, I remember you giving this speech at graduation about following your dreams and never settling for less than you deserve. I wonder if you ever think about that speech now. Rachel's hands were clasped tightly in front of her. If you'll excuse me, I need to check on my other tables. Wait, one more thing, David said, reaching into his wallet. He pulled out a $20 bill and placed it on the table. This is for you. I know tips are probably important in your line of work. The gesture was clearly meant to be condescending. A $20 tip might seem generous to some, but David had just ordered a $400 bottle of wine. The tip was insultingly small given the circumstances. Thank you, Rachel said simply, making no move to take the money. You don't have to thank me, David said with a wave of his hand. I believe in helping out old friends. Speaking of which, I might be able to help you out with something bigger. James looked up sharply. David, what are you doing? I'm being generous, David said. Rachel, you know I run a pretty successful company now. We're always looking for good people. I bet I could find something for you. Maybe in our cafeteria or cleaning offices. It would probably pay better than this. The offer was so obviously insulting that even David's business partners looked shocked. Rachel's face went completely still. That's very kind of you to think of me, she said carefully. But I'm quite happy with my current position. Are you sure? David pressed. I mean, this can't be what you dreamed of doing with your life. Don't you want something better? I think this conversation has gone far enough, said a new voice. Everyone turned to see the man in the suit approaching their table. He was tall and distinguished, with graying hair and kind eyes that were currently fixed on David with obvious disapproval. I'm Tom Walsh, the general manager here, he said. Is there a problem with your service this evening? David straightened up, suddenly aware that he might have crossed a line. No problem at all. Rachel and I are old friends. We were just catching up. Tom's expression didn't change. Rachel, is everything all right? Everything's fine, Tom, Rachel said quickly. I was just taking their order. Good, Tom said, but his eyes remained on David. Sir, I hope you'll understand that we expect all our guests to treat our staff with respect. It's one of our core values here at the Garden Terrace. Of course, David said, trying to recover his composure. I have nothing but respect for Rachel. Like I said, we're old friends. I'm glad to hear that, Tom replied. Rachel is one of our most valued team members. We're very lucky to have her. Something in the way he said it made David pause. There was a weight to his words that seemed to suggest more than typical manager speak about a good employee. Well, she's certainly dedicated, David said uncertainly. She is indeed, Tom agreed. Now, are you ready to place your order? I'd hate for your food to get delayed. David glanced around the table. Robert was just returning from the restroom, and both James and Michael were looking at him with expressions that made it clear they wanted this conversation to end. Yes, we're ready, David said, picking up his menu. Rachel took their orders efficiently and professionally, giving no sign that anything unusual had happened. But as she walked away, David noticed that several of the other servers had gathered near Tom, and they were all watching his table with expressions he couldn't quite read. That was uncomfortable, Robert said once Rachel was out of earshot. What do you mean? David asked, though he was starting to feel less confident about his behavior. You were pretty harsh with her, James said. I mean, she seems like a nice person just trying to do her job. I wasn't harsh, David protested. I was just surprised to see her. You have to admit it's kind of ironic. The smartest kid in our class ends up serving tables. Maybe, Michael said carefully, but that doesn't mean you had to rub it in her face. David was about to respond when he noticed something that made him pause. A well-dressed couple at a corner table had stood up and were walking over to where Rachel was taking another order. They greeted her warmly and she smiled, the first genuine smile David had seen from her all evening. The couple chatted with Rachel for a moment, and then something strange happened. The woman pulled out her phone and took a selfie with Rachel, as if she was someone important. David frowned. That's weird. What? Robert asked. Nothing, David said, but he kept watching. There was something about the interaction that didn't quite fit with his image of Rachel as just another struggling server. But before he could think about it too much, their appetizers arrived and David forced himself to focus on his business dinner. After all, he had more important things to worry about than his old classmates' strange life choices. As the evening wore on, David tried to focus on his business presentation, but he kept getting distracted by small things that didn't quite add up. Every few minutes, something would happen that made him question what he thought he knew about Rachel's situation. The first thing he noticed was how the other staff treated her. When she passed by other servers, they didn't just nod politely like colleagues might. They seemed to defer to her, stepping aside when she approached, asking her quick questions in hushed tones. It was subtle, but David had spent enough time in corporate environments to recognize workplace hierarchy when he saw it. So as you can see from these projections, David was saying to his investors, pointing at charts on his tablet, the market opportunity is enormous. We're looking at... He stopped mid-sentence as a distinguished chef in a white coat emerged from the kitchen and walked straight to Rachel, who was refilling water glasses at a nearby table. The chef spoke to her in what looked like more than casual conversation. They discussed something intently for about a minute, and Rachel nodded several times before the chef returned to the kitchen. David? Robert prompted. You were saying about the market opportunity? Right, sorry. David forced himself to look back at his presentation, but his mind was elsewhere. Why was the head chef consulting with a server about what appeared to be business matters? 20 minutes later, another odd incident caught his attention. An older gentleman in an expensive suit had finished his meal and was preparing to leave when he stopped by Rachel's side. David couldn't hear what they were saying, but the man shook Rachel's hand warmly and seemed to be thanking her for something more significant than just good service. The customer acquisition costs are trending down, James was saying, which is encouraging, but I'm concerned about the long-term retention rates in this market. David nodded absently, but he was watching Rachel walk the gentleman to the door. They talked for another moment before he left, and David could have sworn he saw the man hand Rachel what looked like a business card. David, are you with us? Michael asked with obvious frustration. Yes, absolutely. Long-term retention. Very important. David tried to refocus, but his attention kept drifting. The next strange thing happened when a young woman approached Rachel near the bar. She was well-dressed and seemed nervous, like someone approaching a celebrity. She spoke to Rachel briefly, and Rachel smiled and signed what appeared to be a napkin before posing for a quick photo. David frowned. Who asks a server for an autograph? His confusion deepened when he noticed how Tom, the general manager, interacted with Rachel. Every time he needed to make a decision about something, seating a difficult party, handling a complaint from another table, dealing with what looked like a supply delivery at the back of the restaurant, he would catch Rachel's no eye and wait for some kind of signal from her before proceeding. I think we need to see more detailed financial projections before we can move forward, Robert was saying. Absolutely, David replied automatically. I'll have my team prepare those for you. But his mind was spinning. The pieces didn't fit together. Rachel was dressed like a server. She was taking orders and delivering food. But everything else about the situation felt wrong. The breaking point came when David excused himself to use the restroom. On his way back, he passed by Tom's office, which had its door slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could see certificates and awards hanging on the wall. One caught his eye, a large framed article from what looked like a business magazine. David paused and pretended to check his phone while straining to read the headline. He could only make out part of it. Rising stars in the restaurant industry, young entrepreneurs who are changing. The rest was blocked by the doorframe, but David could see a photo accompanying the article. It was definitely a woman, though he couldn't make out the details from his angle. Can I help you with something? David jumped. Tom had appeared behind him carrying a stack of papers. Oh no, my phone reception is terrible in here. I was trying to check my messages. Tom smiled, but his eyes were watchful. The reception can be spotty in this part of the building. The dining room usually has better coverage. Right. Thanks. David hurried back to his table, his mind racing. When he sat down, his business partners were deep in discussion about market analysis, but David couldn't concentrate. He kept watching Rachel, looking for more clues. He didn't have to wait long. A group of 4 people in business attire finished their meal and called Rachel over to their table. David expected them to ask for the check, but instead, one of them, a woman with silver hair and an authoritative bearing, stood up and shook Rachel's hand like an equal. Thank you so much for the wonderful evening, the woman said, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet restaurant. The new menu items are absolutely inspired. You should be very proud of what you've accomplished here. David nearly choked on his wine. The woman was talking to Rachel like she was responsible for the menu, not just serving it. I'm so glad you enjoyed everything, Rachel replied warmly. Your feedback means a lot to us. Well, you've certainly earned the recognition you've been getting. I read the feature in Restaurant Weekly last month. Very impressive, David's head was spinning. Restaurant Weekly? What feature? As the group prepared to leave, the silver-haired woman turned back to Rachel. I hope you'll consider our proposal for the hotel partnership. I think it could be very mutually beneficial. I'll definitely give it serious thought, Rachel said. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. Hotel partnership? David's mind raced. Servers didn't discuss hotel partnerships with customers. Managers might, or owners, but not. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He sat back in his chair, staring at Rachel with new eyes. The deference of the staff, the consultation with the chef, the business discussions with customers, Tom asking for her approval on decisions. David, you look like you've seen a ghost, James said with concern. David blinked, trying to process what he was beginning to suspect. I need another drink, he signaled to a passing server, not Rachel, who was busy with another table, and ordered another glass of wine. His hands were actually shaking slightly as he picked up the glass. Could it be possible? Could Rachel actually be? He thought back to their earlier conversation. When he'd asked about her education, she'd mentioned the Culinary Institute and hospitality management. At the time, he'd assumed she'd been unable to do anything with her degree. But what if he'd been wrong? What if she'd done exactly what she'd set out to do? David's stomach began to churn. He thought about all the things he'd said, all the condescending comments, the insulting tip, the job offer in his company cafeteria. If Rachel was who he was beginning to think she might be, we should probably wrap this up, Robert was saying. I think we've covered everything we need to discuss tonight. Yes, David said weakly. Good idea. But as his business partners began gathering their things, David found himself frozen in his chair, watching Rachel work the room with what he now realized was the confidence of someone who belonged there. Not just as an employee, but as someone with a much more significant role. The final piece of the puzzle came when a delivery person appeared at the front door with what looked like official documents. Tom signed for them, but then immediately brought them to Rachel, who reviewed them carefully before giving him instructions about where to file them. David felt sick. He'd spent the entire evening humiliating someone who might very well be his professional equal, or worse, his superior. And he'd done it in front of a room full of witnesses, including his potential business partners. "David?" Michael was standing by his chair. "Are you coming?" "In a minute," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. He needed to figure out what was happening before he left this restaurant. Because if his growing suspicions were correct, he might have just made the biggest mistake of his professional life. And based on the knowing looks he was getting from Tom and some of the other staff members, he had a terrible feeling that his mistake was about to become very public knowledge. David's business partners had moved toward the front of the restaurant to settle the bill, but David remained at the table, his mind reeling with the implications of what he was beginning to understand. He needed answers, and he needed them now. When Rachel approached to clear their dessert plates, David made his decision. This was his chance to salvage what was left of his dignity, if there was any left to salvage. "Rachel," he said, trying to keep his voice casual despite the panic rising in his chest. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier." "Oh?" Rachel's tone was carefully neutral as she stacked plates. "Yeah, and I realize I might have come across as a bit insensitive. I didn't mean anything by it. It's just surprising to see how different our paths have been, you know?" Rachel paused in her clearing and looked at him directly. "Different how?" David felt sweat forming on his forehead. "Well, I mean, I went into tech and built this company, and you went into hospitality. Food service. It's just not what anyone expected back in high school." "I see." Rachel's expression was unreadable. "And what exactly did people expect?" Before David could answer, a commotion near the front of the restaurant caught his attention. A man in an expensive suit had entered and was speaking animatedly to the hostess. She was nodding and pointing toward their section of the dining room. The man looked familiar, but David couldn't place him immediately. He was tall, silver-haired, and carried himself with the confidence of someone important. As he made his way through the restaurant, several diners looked up with recognition. "Excuse me," the man said as he approached their table. "I'm looking for Rachel Martinez. I was told she might be working this section tonight." David looked up at the stranger, then at Rachel, who had straightened up noticeably. "I'm Rachel," she said, and David was surprised by the subtle change in her posture and tone. She suddenly seemed more authoritative. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Jonathan Sterling from Pacific Business Journal. I was hoping I might have a quick word with you if you have a moment." David's blood ran cold. Pacific Business Journal was one of the most respected business publications on the West Coast. Why would a journalist from a major business magazine want to talk to a server? "Of course," Rachel said. "Though I should mention I'm actually working right now." "I understand completely," Sterling said with a smile. "I just wanted to confirm a few details for the feature we're running next week. About your expansion plans and the new investor group." David felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "Expansion plans? Investor group." He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Actually," Sterling continued, "would it be possible to get a quick photo? Our photographer couldn't make it tonight, but I have a decent camera on my phone. Here?" Rachel looked around the busy dining room. "I'm not sure this is the right setting." "Oh, I think it's perfect," Sterling said enthusiastically. "Very authentic. Hands-on CEO stays connected to every aspect of her business. That kind of angle." CEO. The word hit David like a physical blow. He stared at Rachel, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Sterling noticed David's expression and turned to him with a polite smile. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met." "Jonathan Sterling, Pacific Business Journal." David tried to speak, but no words came out. Rachel watched him with what might have been amusement. "This is David Chen," Rachel said smoothly. "We went to high school together. He was just telling me about his tech company." "Ah, wonderful." Sterling's face lit up. "Always nice to meet another entrepreneur. What's your company, Mr. Chen?" David managed to croak out the name of his business, and Sterling nodded politely, though he clearly didn't recognize it. "Well, it's a small world," Sterling said. "Rachel, I hate to interrupt your evening, but could we just confirm the details about the Seattle expansion? 12 locations total, with the flagship downtown location opening in the fall. That's correct, Rachel said, though we're actually looking at 13 locations now. We just finalized the lease for the Bellevue site this afternoon. David's vision was starting to blur around the edges. 13 locations. Rachel owned 13 restaurants? Excellent, Sterling said, pulling out his phone. And the total investment for the expansion phase? $42 million for the initial rollout, with another $30 million reserved for the second phase if the market response is positive. $72 million. David felt like he was going to be sick. Sterling snapped a few quick photos of Rachel in her server's apron, standing beside their table. These will be perfect, he said. Really captures the hands-on leadership style that's made you so successful. As Sterling put his phone away, he turned to David again. It's quite impressive what Rachel's accomplished, isn't it? From a single restaurant to a regional empire in just 8 years, and at such a young age. David nodded numbly, unable to trust his voice. The board at the Restaurant Association is very excited about her keynote speech next month. Sterling continued. The theme is innovation in customer experience, which is perfect given her reputation for revolutionary service standards. Keynote speech. Board of the Restaurant Association. Revolutionary service standards. Each phrase was another dagger to David's ego. Well, I should let you get back to work, Sterling said to Rachel. Thank you for the interview. The article should be out next Wednesday. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate the coverage. As Sterling walked away, David sat in stunned silence. Rachel continued clearing the table, moving efficiently around him as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Finally, David found his voice. You own this place. It wasn't a question. I do, Rachel said simply. And 12 others. 13 others. As of this afternoon. David's mind raced back through the evening, recontextualizing every interaction he'd witnessed. The staff's deference, Tom's behavior, the business discussions with customers, the chef consulting her about menu changes. It all made perfect sense now. Why didn't you tell me? He asked weakly. Rachel paused in her clearing and looked at him with steady eyes. You didn't ask. You just assumed. But you were serving tables. You were taking my order. I work alongside my staff regularly, Rachel explained patiently. I believe in understanding every aspect of my business. Tonight I was covering for someone who called in sick. David thought about all his comments throughout the evening. The condescending remarks about her career trajectory, the insulting tip, his offer to find her a job in his company cafeteria. He had humiliated himself in front of someone who was, by any measure, far more successful than he was. Rachel, Harry started, but she held up a hand. David, I think your friends are waiting for you. He looked toward the front of the restaurant, where Robert, James, and Michael were standing by the door, clearly ready to leave. They had witnessed his behavior throughout the evening, and now they knew exactly who he had been insulting. As David stood up on unsteady legs, he realized that his business dinner, the one that was supposed to secure funding for his next venture, had probably just been destroyed by his own arrogance. The $42 million for your expansion, he said desperately. Where's that coming from? Rachel smiled for the first time all evening, and it wasn't entirely kind. Some of it's coming from the 3 gentlemen you had dinner with tonight. They've been investors in my company for the past 2 years. David's world tilted. Robert, James, and Michael weren't just potential investors in his business. They were already backing Rachel's empire. They asked me to arrange this dinner, Rachel continued. They wanted to see how you conducted yourself in different situations before they committed to working with you. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This entire evening had been a test, and David had failed it spectacularly. I think, Rachel said gently, they have their answer now. The walk to the front of the restaurant felt like the longest of David's life. Each step carried him further away from the wreckage of his evening and closer to a reckoning he wasn't prepared for. His potential investors, Rachel's actual investors, stood by the door with expressions that ranged from disappointment to disgust. Ready to go, David? Robert asked, his tone notably cooler than it had been at the beginning of the evening. David nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As they walked toward the exit, he couldn't help but look back at Rachel, who was now speaking with Tom near the bar. Even from a distance, he could see that their body language had completely changed. Tom was clearly receiving instructions, not giving them. The valet brought David's car around first, And as he waited for the others to get their vehicles, the conversation he'd been dreading finally began. "That was quite a performance tonight," James said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I don't know what you mean," David said weakly, though they all knew it was a lie. "Come on, David," Michael said. "We all saw what happened in there. The way you treated Rachel was completely unacceptable." Robert stepped closer, his expression serious. "David, we've been considering an investment in your company for months. The technology is solid. The business plan is sound, but tonight showed us something about your character that we can't ignore." David's stomach dropped. "Look, I know I was a bit harsh with Rachel, but—" "A bit harsh?" James interrupted. "You spent the entire evening humiliating someone you thought was beneath you. What happens when you have to manage employees who don't have Ivy League degrees? How do you treat the cleaning staff at your company? The cafeteria workers you were so graciously offering to find Rachel a job with? It's not like that," David protested. "I respect all workers. Rachel we have history." "It was complicated." "No, it wasn't complicated," Michael said firmly. "You saw someone you thought was unsuccessful, and you decided to make yourself feel better by putting her down. That's not complicated. That's cruel." David felt panic rising in his chest. "Please, just let me explain." "If I had known who Rachel was—" "That's exactly the problem," Robert cut him off. "You should have treated her with respect regardless of who she was. The fact that you only regret your behavior because you found out she's successful tells us everything we need to know about your values." The three men exchanged glances, and David knew what was coming before Robert spoke again. "We're going to pass on the investment opportunity," Robert said. "We can't partner with someone whose character doesn't align with our values." "Wait," David said desperately. "Don't make this decision based on one evening. You know my company, you know what we've accomplished." "We know what you've accomplished," James said. "But we also know who you are now. And that's not someone we can do business with." As the three men got into their cars and drove away, David stood alone on the sidewalk, watching his business opportunity disappear into the night. He should have left then, should have gone home to lick his wounds and figure out how to salvage his professional reputation. Instead, he found himself walking back into the restaurant. The dining room had quieted somewhat as the evening wound down. Rachel was still there, now clearly in her role as owner, moving between tables and speaking with both staff and customers. When she saw David approaching, she excused herself from a conversation and walked over to meet him. "I thought you'd left," she said. "I needed to come back," David said. "I need to apologize." Rachel studied his face for a moment. "All right, I'm listening." David took a deep breath. "What I did tonight was inexcusable. I treated you horribly, and it doesn't matter that I didn't know who you were. You didn't deserve that treatment regardless of your position." "No, I didn't," Rachel agreed simply. "I was cruel and I was arrogant and I embarrassed myself and my potential business partners. But more importantly, I was disrespectful to you and to your staff." Rachel nodded but didn't speak. "I don't know why I acted that way," David continued. "Maybe I was trying to make myself feel better about something. Or maybe I was just being a terrible person. But there's no excuse for it." "Thank you for saying that," Rachel said. "But David, I have to ask, are you apologizing because you're genuinely sorry or because you just lost a major investment opportunity?" The question hit David like a slap. He wanted to say it was genuine remorse, but he wasn't entirely sure too. That was true. The loss of the investment had certainly motivated him to come back inside. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe both. But I think I needed to lose that deal to understand what kind of person I was becoming." For the first time that evening, Rachel's expression softened slightly. "What do you mean?" David looked around the restaurant, taking in the warm atmosphere, the happy customers, the staff who clearly took pride in their work. "You've built something amazing here. Not just a successful business, but a place where people want to work and eat and spend time. I can see it in how your employees treat each other, how your customers interact with you." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "My company is successful too, but I don't think my employees would describe it the way your staff would describe this place. I've been so focused on profits and growth that I forgot about the human side of business." Rachel listened without interrupting. "Tonight, when I saw you working as a server, I assumed you had failed," David continued. "But you were doing the opposite of failing. You were succeeding in a way I don't think I ever have." "How so?" "You know every part of your business because you've worked every job. Your staff respects you because you respect them. Your customers become advocates because you create genuine experiences for them. I've been so busy trying to be important that I forgot how to be valuable. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, David, can I tell you something? Of course. When I was working those study sessions with you in high school, you weren't a bad person. You were just young and unfocused. Tonight you became someone I didn't recognize. David winced. But she continued. But the person standing here now, apologizing and reflecting on his mistakes, this person reminds me more of the David I used to know. The one who was capable of growth and learning. I want to be that person again, David said. I want to build a company that matters, not just one that makes money. Rachel smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Then maybe tonight wasn't a complete disaster. Can I ask you something? David said. How did you do it? How did you build all this while staying true to your values? It wasn't easy, Rachel admitted. I made mistakes and I had to learn from them. But I always remembered that success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about how you achieve it and who you become in the process. David nodded, finally beginning to understand. Rachel, I know I don't deserve it, but would you be willing to give me some advice? Not about business necessarily, but about leadership. About being the kind of person worth following. Rachel considered this for a moment. Tell you what, she said finally. Why don't you come back sometime when you're not trying to impress investors? Come in during a lunch shift, watch how we operate, talk to my staff. See what it looks like when people genuinely care about their work. You'd be willing to do that? After tonight, everyone deserves a chance to grow, Rachel said. Besides, the David I knew in high school was smart enough to help me pass calculus. I think he's smart enough to learn from his mistakes too. As David left the restaurant for the second time that night, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: humility. The evening had cost him a major business opportunity and forced him to confront some uncomfortable truths about himself. But it had also given him something valuable: a chance to become better. 3 months later, when Pacific Business Journal ran a follow-up article about Rachel's continued expansion, it included a small sidebar about the importance of treating all employees with respect. The sidebar quoted an unnamed tech CEO who had recently implemented new policies focused on workplace dignity and employee satisfaction. David never told Rachel that he was the unnamed CEO in the article, but he hoped she would recognize the influence she'd had on his transformation. Some lessons he had learned were worth more than any amount of money, and sometimes the most successful people were the ones who never forgot that success meant nothing if it came at the cost of your humanity.